find it better than normal Flux because of that.
Yeah, well, normal Flux is just basically like, what's it say on my card? What's it say on the table? Can I do this? No.
Yeah.
Okay, move on. Like, there's not really anything going on. It's just like smile when you read cards that strike a chord with you that has nothing to do with the game itself.
Yeah.
And it sounds to me like Math Flux is pushing itself so that it's actually become a game with decisions and numbers flying through your head.
Yep. That's exactly what it is. So that's why it's inherently,
The best
in my opinion,
Flux.
the best Flux, but that doesn't mean it's great, but it's the best Flux.
The best Flux, which it actually sounds like to me like it's tolerable, which is a new page. It's a new realm for Flux for me. All right, guys, here I'm going to go ahead and record here in 3, 2, 1. Hello and welcome to The Good, the Bored, and the Ugly. I'm your host, Joe Sallen. Tonight I'm joined by
Andrew Dennison,
Trent Ham.
And we'll be talking to you guys tonight about Math Flux, 1 hour-long podcast episode dedicated entirely to the new Math Flux edition of Flux. And it's going to be great. We can hardly wait to get started. So let's start talking. No, we're not going to talk to you guys about Math Flux. We're going to talk to you guys about the math that games expect us to do and exactly what our opinions are on math involved in board games. It's a huge part, especially in the heavy games that we play. And I think that this roundtable sort of discussion is going to have quite a few different perspectives to offer. And I think the discussion is going to get pretty intense on this one. We'll see exactly how it goes. I feel like I need a math joke here, like a numbers joke of some sort. Like it's going to be all 6s and 7s for you. I don't know if British people actually say that, but like meaning it's going to be crazy.
Oh, I got a math joke.
All right, Andy.
Why did the kid who was really bad at math suddenly start doing really well at Catholic high school? Because when he saw the dude nailed to the plus sign, he knew they meant business.
Aha. That sounds to me, Andy, kind of like your religion involves the worship of a question mark.
Funny enough. And a discussion group. There's always discussion groups.
Yeah. No, I'd heard that one. It's just I feel like every time I hear somebody tell the beginning of a joke, I'm always like, I remember that, and I can never remember the punchline until they say it, and then I'm always disappointed in both myself and the joke.
Yeah.
It's the kind of painful joke that's just painful.
Yep.
Painful for the teller, painful for the listener, painful for Jesus, painful for everybody.
Yeah, everybody hurts afterwards.
Yep.
That makes
so. We'll talk to you guys about math in games after we've reviewed games, yet before we've hyped them. So let's get kicked off here with a review that I know, Andy, it's been a tough time for you here, and because I haven't seen you in a while. But what have you been doing with all your spare time?
Besides a whole lot of family stuff, as far as gaming goes, one solo game of High Frontier, which kicked my butt. But anyway, mostly I've been playing the new Terra Mystica app that came out for the iPad. And I gotta say, for the most part, it's a really good, faithful implementation of it. I think it's the same company that did the Agricola app, actually. If I remember right. And
yeah,
so
it's is it Playdeck with this one?
I don't remember what they're called.
Playdeck did the Agricola app. It's either Playdeck or I thought it was like Digidiced.
Oh, Digidiced. Yeah, what did they do?
Which they did the Le Havre.
Oh, right.
Le Havre app. Yeah, I believe they did.
Yeah, no, this one's really good.
Le Havre Inland Port. I'm sorry, I don't mean to interrupt you. Just correction. Le Havre Inland Port, the 2-player Le Havre game. Sorry, Andy, keep going.
Right. So, yeah, it's a pretty faithful one. It's got like a good interface in that there's menus for people who aren't a fan of the game, but for people know when I click on the board here, this should happen. It does that. Right now, it's just the base game, which is kind of But what they do that's nice is they implement some things from I think some fan variants plus a few things from the expansion. Like the one thing they got from the expansion that was just critical was the dynamic turn order. You can turn that on.
Yeah.
So that's nice. The expansion's supposed to be coming out soon, which would
Are you just stuck with your race in this game, or how do they do the where you choose which fantasy race you're going to be?
They just kind of draft it like you would in the base game where there's no really one. So there's no auction for them yet, and I'm not sure how they will implement that. The one thing I noticed, and I kind of wonder if this was a fan variant I didn't know about, was I started a game today where I was playing the Cultists, and it was the first time I noticed where people were starting with different beginning victory points based on their race. So I wonder if they did that as like a balancing mechanic, like, oh, these guys are inherently easier to play, so they start with less starting victory points. So that was a little funky.
Are you playing online, or are you playing against computer?
Just against computer. And that's the one thing that I think is kind of problematic is they only have 3 AIs available, and they're all set to easy.
What?
Yeah. And so apparently I don't know if they rushed it out, but there's more AIs coming soon that will be harder. I just don't know why that wasn't there to begin with. That was a little odd.
The AIs are bad.
Yeah, no, I haven't had too much trouble in beating them. So I'm like,
the AIs are bad.
If I was like a new Terra Mystica player, this would probably be challenging me, but it really isn't. I mean, it's the thing that's fun is to go back and play multiple games exploring the races. I haven't got to play that much and kind of seeing what you can do with them.
Mm-hmm.
So for example, like every time I played the Swarmlings, I've always just crashed and burned. But
I rolled as the Fakirs.
Oh yeah, that should tell you there anyway. But I kind of figured out how to grow the Swarmlings correctly, I think, this time, and that's because I just played the Swarmlings like 3 or 4 times. I'm like, okay, this is how they work.
Mm-hmm.
So I think once they get some more AIs out, as well as the expansion races, then it'll be definitely up a notch. The only other thing I've noticed that probably needs some work is it seems like the AI bugs out sometimes, particularly with the mermaids. It's done that to me several times where just the mermaid sits there not knowing what to do.
Yeah. So it just like kind of crashes the app, or?
Yeah, it just locks the game up. Like they just sit there not making a decision and it just spins its wheels, spins its wheels, spins its wheels, and nothing ever happens.
Oh.
So it's an AI bug of some kind, and I'd read on some update they addressed it, but based on a game I've had earlier today, it's apparently still an issue. And you unfortunately, there's no way for you to tell the computer don't pick the mermaids. So
you're just stuck. If you see the mermaids in your game, it's just like
yeah, well, this is likely a possibility. Yeah. So overall, I mean, the interface and all that's good. The AI thing's a little annoying. And there's still a couple bugs that looks like to be worked out. But overall, I think it's a pretty faithful implementation of the base game of Terra Mystica. And they add in, like I said, a couple of the things from the expansion that I consider pretty necessary to make the game better these days.
Yeah, the dynamic turn order. I feel like, knowing what other races are going to be involved and what scoring tiles are there, I feel like being able to make those decisions based on what you see strategically at the beginning of the game is important. So maybe they'll eventually enact those.
Yeah.
But Andy, for the most part, what I felt when I listened to you say to you give your review and talk about the bugs is this, like, from what I've heard in the past, from Suzanne on the board game apps reviews from like the Dice Tower, she's given pretty glowing reviews to other Digidiced games on apps, like game apps, as in the Le Havre port she was very positive on. And what I think is that they've bit off probably quite a bit. And we're all only humans, so the fact that they're dealing with these issues right now is frustrating. And I think that we're so used to apps being produced by companies, like the Angry Birds company, where they somehow made, like $1 billion franchise off of a 99-cent app. But really, like, the people, like app developers everywhere are just, they're not much bigger, or in many cases, they're not even as big as many of the board game publishers that we're talking about being out there. So a little bit of patience can go a long ways. For me, I'm actually kind of glad that I have an excuse to not play it until it's to the point where I would really want to, and that's that I don't have like an iPad right now that's does like my iPad 2 mini, whatever it is, like the iPad mini is just my iPad mini just it can't even take the operating system that's on it. So
Yeah,
no
exactly.
games at all. Like thing doesn't even work.
And this thing does not work. I tried it on a phone and I'm not a fan.
No, this would not be good on a phone at all.
It needs more screen space than a phone offers. It just like one of those things where they tried to squeeze it on a phone and they shouldn't have.
Yeah.
No.
So I think it's not bad, but I might if it's something you've been looking at and you like Terra Mystica and you're thinking about it, maybe give it a few weeks yet to just let them iron out some of the kinks. And I think it would be a lot better.
And in that meantime, there is an online implementation that's totally free, has the same really dumb AI, but at least it has a lot of variants that you could play. There's no ability to play with other players, which I'm sure they'll, eventually be adding to this Terra Mystica app. But there's a pretty decent, if you're sitting in front of a desktop, there's a decent user generated version out there that I've had a lot of fun with, even though I've only played, computer opponents that felt like they were turned to like super easy.
Yep. So anyway, I've been doing that, and I just downloaded the Race for the Galaxy app too, and tried a couple games on that, and that seemed pretty interesting. So,
well, I want to point out that the Race for the Galaxy app actually has a really good AI because they took the old Kelvin AI, which was really good.
Oh yeah,
the AI is not an issue for the Race for the Galaxy app.
No, yeah. Like I'm not a good Race for the Galaxy player, but I feel like I know enough to be okay.
What is Kelvin? I'm sorry.
Keldon, Keldon. It was a free application that you used to be able to play on Windows that had a really good Race for the Galaxy AI. And this is what they literally use that in the app.
Okay.
I played it on the easiest difficulty, and like it kicked my teeth in. It was
yeah, it's a good AI. So if you want to challenge, the Race for the Galaxy app is much better than the Terra Mystica app.
Yeah,
in fact, I would say almost in every way.
Yeah, so double review. Wait for Terra Mystica, play Race for the Galaxy now.
Yeah, I would agree with that.
Yeah. All right, well, that's the Terra Mystica app. Let's move back onto our actual physical tabletop with a short game that seems to try to enact a drafting line and civilization theme in a really short play time. Trent?
Okay, I'm going to talk about The Flow of History. The Flow of History is a game that's designed by Jesse Lee, who is the designer of Ponzi Scheme, a game I've talked about positively in the past. It is currently on an Indiegogo campaign, not Kickstarter, Indiegogo campaign by Tasty Minstrel Games because they're reprinting it in the US. It's already reached its funding goal and is shooting for stretch goals, so it's definitely getting published by Tasty Minstrel in the US sometime late this year, it looks like. I have an earlier version of the game, and that's what I'm going to talk about. Flow of History is basically a card drafting game that likes to think it's a civilization game. I don't know how else to say it other than that. It has a theme of civilization on it, but really what you're doing is kind of a mean card drafting game. So you have this row of cards out there, depending on the number of players, and the deck is in a certain order, but there's like 6 segments to this overall deck of cards that you're drafting from, where there's simpler cards on top or less powerful cards, and they get more and more powerful as you go along until you empty out the deck and the game ends. The way the game works is on your turn, you can either bid on a card by you start out with 4 resources. You can either bid on a card by putting some number of resources and your token on a card, or you can take a card from the row that has your token on it, but then the resources that are also on the card go away into a pool called the supply. Third thing you can do is you can just take a card from another player by paying that number of resources to them. Their resources on their card go to the supply, and you just take the card, and then they don't get it. Or then you can also, if any of the cards have a special ability on them, you can do that for the turn. Or alternately, you can just take basically half the supply of resources for yourself for future rounds. So you can, in theory, put your token out on a card with some resources, and it can stay there for a few rounds while you're doing other stuff. That definitely does happen in this game. I think it plays pretty quickly. It's pretty relatively easy to explain. I would say it's not difficult to explain. I enjoyed it. I think it's one of those games that's going to be real divisive, though. And that was my experience with the people playing it, where I had some people that really, really, really seemed to like it and wanted to play it again and wanted to play it again. And then other people that absolutely hated it. I think part of the reason for that is that this is a game that's going to definitely get better based on knowing the cards that are in the deck. There's about 60 cards overall in the deck. And the better you know them, the better the game is going to be. Because all the different cards have different powers on them of different kinds. And I mean, I'm not going to get into all the details of that, but some of them can be very aggressive towards other players. Many of them are not. Many of them are just like, get more cards or different things like that, or accelerate the game. But some of them are really just like stab another player in the teeth. That's kind of how they are. And that's another aspect that some people don't like, is it's definitely some strong player interaction here. Between the sniping of the cards, just taking cards away from other players, and the abilities and some of the cards themselves, you're definitely interacting with other players here. You're definitely going to hit people in the teeth. You're definitely probably going to be targeting a leader. But here's my feelings on this, and this is why in a game like this that did that type of things, and this was 2 hours long, I would hate it. But the fact that this game is relatively short means I'm fine with it, and I actually kind of enjoy the back and forth. I actually find this to be more friendly than the one thing I didn't really like about the first edition of Through the Ages. I felt in the first edition of Through the Ages that the wars were a little bit too devastating, that it almost made the end game unfun if you weren't a player winning a war in the Third Age. Like,
yeah, you couldn't ignore war. Like,
yeah, you just if you didn't win a war in the Third Age, you were just might as well just hang it up, and it's not even fun. And part of that was you had invested so much in the game that feeling is frustrating. And I will say the new edition of Through the Ages isn't quite nearly as bad. They toned down some of the wars, thankfully. I think that's a good thing. But with this game, you can do some pretty devastating stuff. I don't think there's anything as devastating as a really mean war on culture can be in Through the Ages. It can just snipe a game away from you. But there are some things that are nasty, but nothing that nasty. And the game gets over quickly. So I don't mind it. I think this is a game that will get better, that has enough. It's like what I call a heavy filler. It's kind of the way I think of this game.
Like
it's a game that, it's a heavy
super filler. I know that word gets thrown around.
Super filler, where it's not one that you're investing a ton of time in. You're going to play it in 30 minutes or 40, maybe 45 minutes, somewhere in that ballpark. The deck only has 60 cards in it, and they're going through the row pretty fast. And it goes right around the table. Everybody takes an action. It breezes right along. And so I don't mind the viciousness of some of the cards in a game like that. I really don't. Now, if you really don't like it, as one member of our group doesn't like that kind of thing, that's just how it's going to be. You're going to have to live with it. But
or not, I guess. You don't have to.
It's vicious. That's just how it is. There's nothing you can really do about it. But if you're okay with that and you're willing to tolerate that, I enjoy it. I think it's a good super filler. It's definitely going to stay in my super filler file. There were some people in my group that absolutely loved it. There was other people that absolutely hated it. It's divisive. I think the player interaction is the divisive part. If you're okay with a lot of player interaction and you're heavy filler, you're like super filler, you'll probably enjoy this game because I think there's a lot of fun in it. If you can't stand that, then just stay away and don't bother. And that's Flow of History.
Well, Trent, that's interesting. I had a slightly different take, but I think ultimately the same almost review that I'm going to give. So just to offer an alternative perspective on it, I would just preface it all by saying that I think that your comparison to Through the Ages is very, very apt, because this game very much feels like Through the Ages because you have this drafting line in front of you. And what I really like about it is just the base mechanism to me is genius. That you have these cards out there, you have a fairly limited resource pile that kind of brings to mind Pax Pamir. And on your turn, you can reserve a card, a certain amount of money on there, or you can snipe a card. Now, sniping a card generally is really good for the opponent because they get paid all their money back, plus they get money from like the reserve to basically compensate for it. So they get paid a bunch of money. So you know, like, to me, that's just decisions is what I see that as. I see the decision in terms of when you reserve a card, how much do you reserve it for? Because sometimes you just reserve a card you know your opponent wants, try to take money from them. Other times you reserve a card you really want and you actually want to do it, but you've got a certain amount that like might be good for other things you can do. Now, the size of the drafting line, I think, really does determine what kind of options are out there and how many decisions there are. So it makes it a little bit problematic because I want to see lots of cards as there is in like a 5 or, you know, like a 5 or I think it goes up to 5.
Yeah, it
a
goes up to
5-player
5.
game. Okay, in like a 5-player game, you got all these cards available. But in the issue that I see, like Trent, like you mentioned, is that some of the interaction is direct interaction. Like you choose a player, you take something from them. But you have to have a higher war value than them. I found personally, though, that the person who's going heavy warfare usually is not going to even come close to winning this game. And I think that's where Civ games kind of need to find this really weird and almost improbable balance between war being important enough to be viable, but at the same time, not so all important that players that have a great, you know, have been doing an excellent job managing everything in the game end up getting totally ruined because they were a point or two below military-wise. And I think that the original Through the Ages had a pretty good system of doing it, but it had some cards that were not, unfortunately, compatible with the system they had. And I think that's really what they changed in the update to Through the Ages. You don't really see like big rules changes so much as you just see like cards that have been, I would say modified to produce the same sort of game-shattering changes to the ecosystem in the game. I think that the Flow of History in many ways reminds me of the original or the second edition, I think, or maybe third printing that I played of Through the Ages, where they still hadn't changed anything. So some of the cards in there are ones that I would say you absolutely need to tell your, like when you teach the game, you have to teach those cards because otherwise they will come up and they will strike a player so wrong. For example, there's a card, I think the single card that you must explain at this point is called Communism.
Yes,
in the late game,
yes.
it steals, literally, when a person buys this card, it takes every single dollar from every single person. Nobody is unaffected by it. And I think that therein might lie the problem, is that nobody is unaffected by communism, which feels kind of weird because it feels like you're all building up your own unique civilization, but then, oh, communism comes around and apparently now we're all communist. It's a weird, like, I like the effect thematically, but I don't like how it applies to the entire table. It feels like other people are making government decisions for you, which feels like it's really oddly out of your hands.
And a game you didn't play in, this is something that happened to Nate, and I think it's why he didn't like the game. He had like 17 resources.
Okay, I had 10 when it happened to me, and I just remember...
Here's what happened to him. After him, like the next player took a card off the row, and then communism flipped. The player after that put their token in one resource on communism, and then someone sniped it. So he didn't even get a chance to redistribute.
Yeah, exactly. He had and that's where I think the system here on play in the Flow of History to me seems like it would be best suited for 3 players maybe or 2, because I just get that feeling as I play it, like the same way I feel when I play Through the Ages, which is that there's so many different things going on here that the less other players I have to track and count on, like, because you need to really focus time on your own civilization. And in the Flow of History, it's not quite at that level, but the amount of as it isn't Through the Ages, but the amount of decisions you're making in terms of what cards you're going to go for and how much you're going to bid on them and whether or not you're going to snipe other players' resources or other players' cards and sacrifice your resources. I love those decisions. I really love how I've got this like sort of tableau building up in front of me. So I can totally see like that's frustrating because Trent, it happened to me in my first game and I was really coming at it with like this very like, this is my first game, I'm not going to worry about it. And so I tried to go straight warfare, and my ending game, though I felt like I played warfare about as best I could, not knowing the cards in the game, I had about half the next player. I was last place, and I had like 10 points. The next highest player had like 18. And that made me feel like the warfare in this game still needs to be, I don't know, something needs to happen to it. I felt like the effects of the warfare cards were not always negative. Like I think what happened in your game, Trent, where a lot, like the whole table was kind of rubbed the wrong way, was one player like ward another player, taking away one of their cards, which opened up their card to the ability to take any card in the row. So they took a card on their next turn that then ended the game and essentially was worth more points than their previous card. So it was like, I suppose thematically it was like this huge rebuilding after a war, but still like that's not something that the table is going to be okay with, at least not the tables that we have in our group.
Yep, I'd agree.
So I love the idea. I love the base mechanism of Flow of History. Flow of History has great potential. It's a great seed. It still needs more, I don't know, like it just needs, it needs the type of new edition of Through the Ages that Through the Ages got, but it needs it more desperately than Through the Ages does. I think one of the main reasons of that is that it has a very innovation-like randomness of card flipping. Like you'll flip the top card of the deck frequently and take that. And sometimes it's great, sometimes it's awful, and it's very random. And that's like innovation, which innovation to me is a game that has that randomness, but also has a lot of depth to it once players know what is available for their draws, even if you still might get screwed by the randomness. To me, Flow of History desperately needs that next edition way more so than Through the Ages did, but I still want to see it a lot. So, any further anything, guys?
I don't have anything else to say.
Okay.
I think
Andy,
Andy
you
might
still
be
there?
asleep.
What?
And, okay, I was like, oh man, because so since our move, I haven't had to deal with like me getting dropped by our listeners don't even know. Like I used to get dropped, and then I'd be like talking to myself for 15 seconds, 20 seconds, probably up to 5 minutes at my worst times. But yeah, I haven't had to deal with that in our new connection, even though our connection is slower, it's more consistent. I'm just glad that you guys are both there. And now I'm going to segue us into our topic with my review. I'm going to talk about 1846. 1846 is largely touted by those who play 18xx games, two of whom I am sitting here and recording this podcast with, as the best game to play with new players. This is a great game for teaching people 18xx games because it is short and palatable. It has a simple stock track. It is a one-dimensional stock track, and it is only affected by fairly controllable or fairly large order concerns, meaning that it only advances if all shares of this company are owned, it'll advance once. If it only decreases when the president sells shares, and so when he's kind of trying to dump the company. It will also go up double steps if, depending on how much money the player is making, the player is able to get out of their runs with the train. So in many ways, it's trying to encourage you to make the best out of the runs on the table. Make the most money is essentially what this is with your company. So it's not about like ruining other players' futures and starting up a separate company that then will leech off them in the future. It's more about like you running the best company, and there is ample space for the most part on this table to make on the board to make viable companies for fairly much every company in the game. I would say that there's usually, depending on the number of players, the map is not going to change, but the businesses or the companies do change. Now, that makes me think that this game is probably best with like 4 players because it plays 3 to 5. And since the board doesn't change at all, but the companies that are in it do change, the companies that are present do change, that makes me think like, I don't think the board is really made for 6 companies. I think that it's made for 5 companies, which means to me that like a 4-player game is fine because like 5 companies seems to be okay. But I just imagine a 5-player game to me would feel like, I don't know, like maybe I guess everybody has their own company. I never did play it with 5. Anyway, so in 1846, you are fairly deliberate with what you do with your train company. You can lay double the track that you normally would in an 18xx game, and you're doing 2 operating rounds for the entire game. So you'll do 1 stock round where you kind of mess around with how much of stock you have in your company, and you can pay for other players' companies' stocks. And anyway, you'll always have 2 operating rounds, and you always build twice if you can afford it, because every single tile in this game costs money, unless there's companies that have special abilities and special places. Anyway, so in a lot of ways, this game is really kind of funneling players into trying to find the best way to make money on the map. And it tries to sort of, I think, dilute the other elements, or even just make them not a factor that you'd see in an 18xx. Like, you're very rarely going to see people selling a bunch of stock in one company to then buy stock to start up a new company, because it doesn't have a negative effect on the player that owns the company they're selling stock in. And really, like, you're able to, because of the rules in this game, you're able to continue to run your trains even after they've been rusted, which is a 18xx general way of forcing players to make huge investments with existing companies by making them buy a new train. Anyway, though, it lets you use your trains once, even after they've been rusted, so that way you can still sort of recoup a little bit of money and prepare more on the spot for what's going to happen in terms of needing to buy a train. And then once you've got your train route decided on, you're then going to pay out money just like you would in any other 18xx, and you continue to do this until the bank breaks. Did I miss anything, guys? Is there any big selling point that I missed?
The other big thing that makes this kind of good for new people is for a lot of 18xx games, there's that really kind of wonky, funky opening auction, which is really cool.
Oh, I totally forgot about that. Yeah,
it's really cool when you know what you're doing with it, but when you don't, it can really wreck your game. And they just do a nice little drafting mechanic to get your private companies, which actually can have some interaction because of the way the draft works. You can be completely planning on, I'm only going to buy this private and I'm not buying anymore because my strategy doesn't allow me to spend any more on privates. Well, crap, now I have to buy a private. Like, that can happen to you, and then you just got to make lemonade out of lemons at that point. But yeah, the draft, I think, eases players into it a little bit more.
I like the draft actually quite a bit, Andy. I like how you kind of have to make tactical decisions at the beginning of the game, but at the same time, you're trying to sort of form together like this overarching strategy. To me, what it does is it makes it so that every game has at least, I don't know, it's a small amount of variable setup.
Because a certain amount is taken out based on player count. So
yeah. Well, yeah, that was a very big thing that I neglected to mention. I appreciate you bringing that up. And I think really here that draft at the beginning of the game, like Andy has mentioned, is, to me, it shows me that this game has been played to the point where they feel that all of those companies that you can start the game with are balanced. So they're not just going to, start you with, or let your group balance them as they do in an average 18xx auction, which can make it, like Andy said, even more friendly for new players.
Yeah, and I don't like. I'm of two minds with 1846, and don't get me wrong, I like me some 1846, but I think I come down more on the camp of 1846 is a great game for people who don't want to play a lot of 18xx, because a lot of the weird kind of mechanisms of the game don't really transfer to the vast majority of 18xx games. So my personal feeling is, if someone was ready for it and they really want to see what an 18xx is like, 1889 I think is still the better teaching game, in my personal opinion. But I think if you've got particularly a Euro gamer who wants to try 18xx and they're not wanting that really rough treatment that an XX can give you, and they're not, that person's not going to be okay with it, then this is definitely one to do, because it definitely sands off some of those rough edges, like with the train rusting, as you talked about. It's really hard to just completely hose yourself in 1846, whereas in 1889, you'll get the 18xx experience, but that also includes the swift kick to the privates if you're not watching yourself too. So, but I like it a lot. And I think the thing that makes it nice is there's enough interesting things you can do in the system that someone that's sitting here now, like me at 35-ish plays of 18xx, would still quite happily sit down with 1846 and enjoy it.
Yeah, I think that there is a really cool initial, like, how am I going to make this work phase to the game. So let me, I guess, get into my actual review of the game, which is exactly what Andy said, that there's some interesting decisions to be made. Like, I ended up with a couple of companies, and I ended up kind of in like third place, or third in turn order. So I had to kind of wait for other players to start their companies and then make an assessment of, like, what am I going to do in this game? When is my turn? So, and that first turn, usually I would say, like, all players at the table are thinking so much that the time just melts away. Like, you're not like sitting there waiting for your turn. You're just like, wondering what the hell you're going to do. Like, what is he going to do? What am I going to do? Like, there's a lot of intense pressure and tension. I loved it. Absolutely loved that feeling. Like, when I was able to take the Big Four and the Ohio and Indiana private companies and then dovetail them into this New York Central monster that was able to go to make east-west routes before any other player was set up for them, with the exception of like the little pitiful east-west route up in Detroit to Chicago.
Grand Trunk, which is basically east-west company.
Yeah, that's all. It's a very easy run though, and it's a very, like, I would say it's a pretty obvious run, and it doesn't set you up for much late game. I don't know. It's okay. It's never going to get terrible, but it's not going to be the best company by the end of the game. I don't know. I feel like just seeing the other things that are present in the game and trying to make, like, to me, like, every company in this game gives me an interesting thing to think about, and how am I going to make that work? And that's kind of cool. Like, I like being able to approach this from all those different angles, but to have this sort of draft at the beginning of the game that makes me at least sort of filters or throttles the information so that I've only got so many decisions to make. And a little bit of prior knowledge goes a long way in 1846. If you don't like your first game, I really highly recommend playing your second game. So anyway, yeah, so the first, like, I would say hour of this game is pure gold. And then it starts to sort of develop into where I really think the game takes a few, I don't know, it feels to me like it takes a couple of missteps, and that's in a couple of rules that allow players, for example, like the way stock rounds work, when it gets to where everybody has gone around, bought, spent all their money, then one player who owns another player's stock can sell a stock, and then that stock goes to the open market. And if the other player has no money to buy it back, or is already hit their stock limit of how much they can have in that company, it's not going to make their stock go down because it's in the open market. And to me, that adds a little bit of a take that element to the game, where you almost want to be invested a little bit in everybody else who owns stock in your company, just so that you have sort of like, a little bit of a bargaining chip, so that you don't sell each other's stock just to make it go down. Because when that does happen, when the stock does go down together, to me, that's just like we both lose, because the game lets us do that. And since you're winning right now, you lose more than I lose technically, but we both lose. And that to me just sucks. It's a take that element that I hate, absolutely hate. I don't like that rule at all. So that's one little misstep. And then the other thing to me is, I don't know, just that basically about 2.5 hours into this game, I had ended up with a train company that was pretty much set up to make a consistent amount of money to the whole rest of the game. And my decisions at that point were fairly minimal. Like, they were the difference between making $53 a share and $57 a share. And every time that I put more and more thought or more and more time into my turn, it was just costing the entire table more time, and all I was doing was paying an extra $1 or $2. And speaking of those dollars or two, that's where you have to start counting out how many cities you can get in your route and how much money every city is worth, add it all together. And it's not the type of short-term, like your brain is not capable of this sort of short-term memory. It simply isn't. The amount of numbers that fit in the average human brain is not capable of handling what it takes to sit there and look at an 18xx route and get all the way through it. That's why you see 18xx players always packing their calculators. On top of that, you're going to see at the end of a route, at the end of a payout round, people are always getting out their calculators to figure out how much money everything is worth. So how much do I get? I have 3 shares in this company, and they paid out 46. What's 3 times 46? And I assume that this is kind of like your multiplication tables just start growing and growing, and being an 18xx player is partially just knowing like a specific subset of the larger existing multiplication table. And to me, it's I guess a skill I've not yet built up, even though I'm getting pretty close to double-digit 18xx plays, and I still haven't built up that skill. But it is something that slows not just me down, it slows down the players that have played way more 18xx games than I have at the table down. And it makes the entire game drag out, because it's like, that's what matters. It's money that wins this game, and the money is going to be won on what feels like decimal points. Like, I lost a game of 18xx 70, I think it was 74-12 to 72-72, meaning that if I had $150 more, I would have won this game. And with the way that you want to keep the game going, it almost breeds this sort of like complacency and an idea that, like a capitalist idea, that you have to pay attention to the stocks you own. So like other players can run their company, you have stock in their company, they shout out to the table how much money their stock is worth and then move on. So if you forget to collect your income on one set of 3 stocks in this game, for example, at the late game, I was making $270 on 3 stocks because of this company that Nate was running amazingly well. And if I forgot to collect that, there went my game. And that's the way that 18xx feels. It feels like a bunch of interesting decisions that you make in the first half hour that play into 2.5 hours. Let me put it like this. The first hour and a half is fun. The last hour of the game feels like it's a resolution that goes on too long. The next hour and a half of that game is interspersed in between everything else of all the math you have to do. You are not only doing math to figure out how much your route is worth, you are not only doing math to figure out how much you need to pay out to everybody who owns shares, including yourself, when you do that math. You are then having to do math to continue to keep the bank replenished with the type of chips that needs to be done. So you're always like moving five white chips to make 1 red chip, and 2 red chips to make a blue chip, and 3 and 5 blue chips to make a light blue chip, and 2 light blue chips to make a black chip, and then 5 black chips to make a dark blue chip, which you feel great when you get, because it's awesome to have those 500 chip anything. Anyway, guys, it's not there. The technology is not there. We are at our topic. Our topic is math. And the math in 18xx is automated, but our brains are not. And I can't play 18xx games because of it. I am not at that level. I do not possess the patience to wait for other players to do it. I do not possess the patience to do it carefully myself. I do not possess the patience to get out a calculator and do my taxes at the table. Math, guys.
It's beautiful.
Different strokes for different folks.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't know. Like, I guess the only thing to add to that is I would say a lot of that does come with repeated play. And so I would say, yeah, I don't know. I could see, I guess, why 18xx can become a lifestyle game is because all of that becomes much faster and easier the more you do it. But yeah, I mean, math and that kind of crunching calculations, that can be a major turnoff for a lot of people. Now, for me, obviously, in the kind of games I like, it is totally not. One of the best experiences I ever had in gaming was playing Arkwright, where I was trying to run 4 companies in Arkwright, which I would not recommend that for a new player. Don't ever, ever try to do
Even
that.
experienced players, that's silly.
Oh,
This
Jesus.
is ridiculous.
Yeah, but like I felt like I was doing battle with numbers in my head, and I'm like, they were just like wanting to break loose and destroy me, and it was up to me to battle them into submission to win the game. And I think I did fairly well. I don't know if I won that one, but I did really well. Yeah, I mean, that one melded my brain more than any 18xx I've yet ever played. But for me, that's an enjoyment. Like, doing battle with that is fun. Like, I like figuring those things out.
Well, Andy, like, I want to make a difference here. I want to make a distinction between what you're talking about in terms of making the numbers work for you. That to me is fun also. Like, that to me is the beginning part of the 18xx. When you're sitting there thinking about what do you want to par your company at? How much do you want? How much money do you want to flow into this company? How much money do you have? What can you do with that money? Those are fun decisions. Those are strategy. Those are long-term planning.
Right.
Like that part of the game is, to me, absolutely worth it. I would never criticize that. Like, the thoughts when you're like, how much money do I have? What can I do with it? That's awesome. And that to me is not my criticism of the game.
Yeah, so you're talking more in the late game when it's kind of playing itself out.
Well, but it continues throughout. Like, at the beginning, I feel like, well, I don't know. I don't want to say we all, because we might even have like young enough listeners here where they're not teaching the multiplication tables anymore like they taught to me. Like I learned it up to 15 when I, like 15 times 15. I was supposed to know what everything was up to 15. And to me, like when I do the math in 18xx, I think that for the first 2/3 of the game, that it's pretty much staying pretty close to that. Where like your train companies are going to be running for around maybe 11 or 12. I mean, every 18xx is a different experience, but it's all pretty similar. They're all going to be running for, like 9, 10, 11, depending on how much you can get out of it and what you're expecting for later on. It's once you get into that late game that like the options, like they're all very comparable, but there usually is one ideal option, which means that you've got to sit there and figure out, like, if I go here to here to here to here to here to here to here, and I skip over this one because my train lets me skip over that one, and it lets me skip over this one, like, this is my best route. And I feel like 1846 does the absolute best job I've ever seen. Though I do, your comments on 1889, Andy, make me want to play it again, just for the fact that I want to be able to make sure that my criticism does not have any holes in what I'm saying. Yeah,
I get what you're saying on that too. Because it can be very nitpicky in the routes.
Detail oriented. It's no longer
the 18xx. The more,
it's how much you're willing to be patient and sense everything.
And I would say I've also found the more operational the game is, the more it is about the track and the running the good company, the more towards that end game state the game tends to be. So an example to counter that in 1889, the routes are not hard to calculate in that game. Like it's very clear what your best one is going to be. Maybe if you get a diesel, but that's only assuming those even come out.
It's really a small map with a whole bunch of mountains through the middle, so you really usually only have one or two routes.
Right. Now the thing that to caution about 1889 though is like, you said about selling somebody's stock it feels like you bring both of them down. I think, Trent, correct me if I'm wrong, was it 1889 we played online that was the bloodbath recently?
89 definitely was, yes.
Yeah, like, oh God, it was bad. It's like, oh, you're selling my stock. Oh, wait, now I have to get my stock back. Okay, now I'm selling your, oh God, there was this chain reaction of stock sales.
Which is what every time. So the specific situation in both of these games, like, so I've played 1846 twice, full disclosure. My first game I considered a learning game. I wanted to play it again. I still felt that sort of like numbers frustration by the end, but the players in that game I felt like moved along at a pretty decent pace. There was never any like bogging down in my first game. Trent, you were in this game. You actually taught me the game and taught my little brother. My little brother learned how to play this for the first time. To me, I didn't feel like there was any player problems at all in that game. It was mainly just like me wrestling with, not with the system of the game, but more with like the numbers calculations that I had to do as a result of the system. The second game of 1880 and of 1846 that I played, I ended up with a company, with the only company in the game that was able to make consistently 4 times my stock price every operating round for like 3 operating rounds in a row. Like I would have literally quadruple jumped on the stock track had the game permitted me to. Mm-hmm. And if you had bought my stock, you would have not only got your money back in the first round, you would have made like $4 in 2 operating rounds. And your stock now would have been worth $150 as opposed to the 110 that it started at. And to me, like that meant like I was playing the game right. Guess what happened though, gentlemen? My stock was sitting on the open market because I had to sell it from my company to the open market in order to facilitate the purchase of 2 trains that then set me up for this late game strategy. If I had been playing the game with players that understood how good this was, how well I was setting myself up, they would have been like, my stock is prime. They're going to go scoop that up. Instead, they let my stock rot. It sat there literally 5 stock rounds. And instead of being bought up by players who know what they are doing, it was let to rot by players who were too focused on trying to make new companies work. And so instead of a jump up by being owned by all players, I ended up with a jump down. That, listeners, is a double jump on a stock chart. And that is not something that you can come back from if it happens once. I had that happen to me 5 times, and I lost this game by $150. I've already told you my scores. Like, so what to me was frustrating was that the other players, like I had no control over those 4 stocks in this open market being purchased up. And even the player that won both of the games I've played, the elusive Nate, he won the first game, and he once sold 3 stocks to do the same thing I did. And all 3 of those got bought up immediately by players who knew that they were going to be worth something. He told me that that was somehow a better strategic move, and that in my game, selling 4 stocks was just not that good. And then he later on said that it was a bad move by other players not to purchase my stocks. Now, I'm not the competitive person who's going to say this game sucks because I lost. But when you're that much at the mercy of what the whole table thinks about your stocks, like I had the only company in the game that was able to pull off, I was making literally double every other company at the game's pull-in. And I was paying out every single round. Other companies were withholding to get to the point where they could make what I was making. And then after like 2 operating rounds, they'd make that. Like, I'm not saying that I'm a genius at this game. I absolutely am not. But I will tell you right now, when that type of thing happens, I don't want the entire table to be able to decide that I'm not going to win, even though I've got this great company.
Yeah, but then the counter argument to that too is, well, I don't know. Like, there's been times where I've purposely dumped good stock because I knew it would drag somebody down and allow me to catch up to them.
And that counter argument, Andy, I feel like no 18xx game that I have played, and I have now played 1830 twice. I've played 1889 twice. I've played 1849. I've played 1846 twice. I've played 18OE. I've played Poseidon. And I know Poseidon is it says 18xx in the box, so go ahead and sue me for using that word. But in all those games, I've still not seen one where just selling somebody else's stock didn't feel like just like you being a dick to somebody. Like it's straight up like you don't buy stock in these games just to then hurt them. But that's what a lot of games let you do in this 18xx genre. You see that, for example, in 1830, that the par for a company is at 60, and that person has then worked their stock up to the point where it's worth 88. And you go ahead and you buy their stock for 60, you immediately then on the next stock round sell it all for 88. You just made yourself $28 and hurt other people.
No. You don't do it on the next stock round. You do it that stock round.
No. That's what I mean. On this, no, what I mean is the next time it goes around the the table. And that, to me, that's stupid. That's absolutely stupid. It's stupid that a game would have that. If a company's stock is that high because the company is being valued that high by the market, then it doesn't matter what one, I wanted to use a bad word here. We're a family-friendly podcast. One investor, what they think about your stock is not going to impact the entire stock market as drastically as it does in the type of games you're talking about, Andy. And to me, that made me think 1846 is the closest this is ever going to get for me. It's the closest it's ever going to get to pleasing me, and it still is absolutely light years away from being within a what I would call my wheelhouse. I will never wait for another hour and a half for other players at the table just to figure out how much money we all get, including myself, which is like, oh, I run for the same amount again. Here, take another $58. Take another $58, everybody, for all my stock. It's just to me, and it wasn't even that long. Like, I've played 18xx's that were double the length of this game that I played, and it was always that same sort of thing. It's the math. Like, it is, to me, here's what I think. 18xx is a game that needs to be app-enabled more so than any other game out there. But it needs an app that is, like, just intuitive to the different types of games out, like 18xx games out there. And it needs to be able to figure your money for you. Like, they need that credit card Monopoly version of this, because otherwise you end up playing as everybody having to be the banker in Monopoly. And I know that that our listeners, especially those of you that like 18xx, were all the people who raised their hand whenever somebody was like, who wants to be the banker? You're like, oh, me. I want to make sure that I'm always interested by doing, like, menial calculations. That's not me. I'm like, I would rather, like, be sitting there joking around, shooting crap with my friends, and this game makes me be the banker constantly, and I resent that. Yeah.
But let's counter that, because so we've been on this for a bit. So we got math in economic games, right? And I would say Arkwright does a similar thing in some ways, but
it's not nearly at this level. Like when it happens, it's like, okay, let me be patient for a little while, and then it goes away. Like 18xx is like, this is a part of the game. You're having fun.
Yeah, but let's counter that too with, like, because I don't find the math in economic games in 18xx to be frustrating. What I find frustrating mathematically in games is more on the Euro side of it.
Yeah.
In particular, like the well, I don't know. The best way I can think of it is like a lot of the gets into like the point salad insanity. So when it becomes like something like, okay, here's my victory track, here's my base score, okay. If I take this tile, that multiplies X times 2 by the number of farms I have. And I don't know, like I find that kind of thing in Euro games to be vastly less intuitive than the math involved with an economic game like Indonesia, Arkwright, or 18xx.
Indonesia, Andy, don't mention Indonesia here. Do not sacrifice that sacred cow just yet. And I'm pretty sure that's maybe one of the areas of the world that considers them sacred is India. I know it's not India, but I don't know. Anyway, you're definitely not making cow farms in Indonesia, at least. So maybe my sacred cow reference was appropriate. I apologize to everybody who's offended by that. Anyway, Andy, so what you're just talking about there is like the idea of point salad. And the idea that when you assess all these tiles and all these options that are available, it's like ultimately it's just a bunch of hoops you have to jump through to get to the ultimate number. And the number is not as masked in 18xx. Is that what you're saying?
I guess what I'm saying is the math in economic games, at least for me, is much more intuitive, much more easily calculatable than the way it can often be done in some kinds of heavy Euros.
Well, here's what I would say, Andy.
Yeah,
I don't know. Did you have something you wanted to finish with?
Well, I don't know. Like, I just find that to be less frustrating, and so for me, like, the frustration can come to me, let's say, in the Gallerist, for example. There's a lot of ways to get different kinds of points. And then
solo games are the perfect ones for you to mention this way because they make me feel the same way.
Yeah, and like I always feel, and I never expect to do well in a VTOL game initially, but I always feel like I've done cripplingly bad because someone forgot to mention that, oh, to really do well in this game, you've got to collect these tiles which multiply X victory points by 5.
Yeah, I mean that just okay, Andy. I was with you until you said that because that last statement you said makes it sound to me like you just need to play the game more than you have because like
that's
somebody
part of
dropping a bomb on you at the last minute sounds to me like something that's more of a new player problem and
that is, and I admit that aspect of it. But what I'm saying is like a lot of times the points you get out of those games are less tied to the concept of the game. I mean, it's like, well, I get 9 points for doing this. Why? I don't have any idea. It's just
well,
points.
usually, Andy, the answer to the why there is because you've set that 9-point action up by doing this in the first round and this in the second round.
No,
and
I'm just talking about the action itself. Like, why are these points valuable in this instance here? Like, I don't know, like economic games, like it just seems like the way you go about gathering your points, because money is points basically when you get down to it. It's just more intuitive. It makes sense to me.
Hold on, Andy. In Agricola, is food really worth points?
No, like Agricola is another example of a Euro that confounds me to high heaven because I have never progressed beyond getting 30-point scores in that game. But it's
one game when I helped you. If you remember, Andy, the one game when I helped you, you scored in the 40s.
once or twice. Yeah.
Yeah, you scored in the 40s, and it was because you were about to take an action, and you didn't look at the whole table and see who else would steal your action from you. And I did, and I knew what was going to happen. And the reason I told you was not because I'm a nice person. It's because the other guy who I was competing with wasn't you. It was the guy who needed the action that you should have taken. So that's.
But I'm just saying, for me personally, like the math involved with some Euro games is actually less intuitive to me than the math involved with a lot of these economics.
I don't know if I'm calling the math unintuitive. I think what I'm doing is I'm calling the math cumbersome.
Yeah, and see, for me, I don't find it cumbersome. Like, for me, the calculations are fine. There's a certain pleasure in doing them, and it might just be the way my brain works different from yours, too.
Andy, what is 3 plus 7 plus 5 plus 6 plus 0? Divided by
21.
Divided by 10, and then I want you to take. So you divide that by 10, or no. I'm sorry. I've already divided by 10. I want you to take that. Well, hold on. This is way too easy of a number. Let's play late game 18OE here. 7 plus 11 plus 9 plus 8 plus 3. Except it's a bonus in case you can hit this extra city, which is worth 7. Let me tell you later on if you hit that city or not. Plus 6 plus 5 plus 9 plus 8. But I want you to only take the top 8 of those cities that I just mentioned. And then I want you to times that by 4 because that's how much I get. And I want you to times that again by 5 because that's how much you get. And then I want you to times that, or you just take that much for this person because that's how much they get.
1,030.
I think the answer to every question here is 42. It's also who is God? God is 42, right? The movie.
Bonus points to whatever listener figures out if I was right.
Well, the thing is, Andy, here's what I think about that. What you just mentioned is, I think that Euro games obscure the exact point value at a given time, but at the same time, you're usually only making a single calculation based on not necessarily figured out constant numbers. It's variables that ultimately make that calculation. And in some heavier Euros, you're making several of those calculations at once, and it can get very confusing. And I agree with you, Andy. I've yet to do well in a game of any of Vital Lacerda's. Like, I always feel like I'm frustrated by the fact that I don't really get exactly how many points everything is worth. I see how the different elements of the game balance each other, but I still don't see what is the best thing for me to do. And in many ways, that makes me feel like I haven't mastered the game. But it also breeds some frustration, just like you've mentioned. Now, let me drop a little bomb on you here, Andy. Based on just what you said, 18xx is comforting because it is a game that is full of constants. It is adding together constants, and it is something that is, to me, procedural. It's like taking that slow math class that they offer to the kids at our high school that are not able to take geometry, algebra 2, go on with their math. They call it like consumer math at my high school. It's the sort of things that are going to be involved in the actual balancing of your checkbook, you know, like writing a check for X amount of money and then balancing it to your accounts and seeing whether or not you're going to have enough to make this other calculation that goes, you know, to 2 decimal points and is a 4-figure digit before that. It's just a matter of whether or not, I mean, if a calculator makes it all go away really quickly, but the volume, it's not the specific mass of a single, you know, not the size of the calculation, it's the volume. It's how many calculations like this are you doing in a round? How many calculations like this are you doing in the game? And that's where I get exhausted. However, Euro games, the way that you describe them, Andy, sound to me like that high-level math. Like you're doing a lot of calculations that are based on probabilities of what will happen later on. Meaning, like, for example, let's take the most point salad game ever, Castles of Burgundy. Let's take the point salad game that everybody seems to agree on that is a good game. For the most part, I'm yet to hear a negative review of Castles of Burgundy that didn't involve somebody saying that the game didn't have any theme. Fine, whatever. In that game, like, I'm always making decisions based on what I can do right now and what I can do later on in the game. It's always like, you know, where am I at in this game? What can I do with what I've given? And the calculations to me are always like I'm never thinking in exact numbers. I'm always thinking in like, I know how good this is because of how this system works. The larger an area that I can fill, the better it is to get that finished in the late game. The more small areas I've got in my whatever they call it, region, you know, on my player board, the more that I want to focus on finishing those off in the early game and then finding sort of ways to sort of collect points based on what I've already done in the early game into the late game. So to me, it's based a lot more on, I guess, a more first blush analysis of what you see than that sort of like nitpicky, like, I'm your accountant, I need you to balance these books. Like, my little brother played this game for the first time, and he said it made him feel an awful lot like he was at work. Like, he was making sure that all the numbers, and this is an accounting word for all of you accountants out there, I know there's at least one, tied out. In 18xx, you're tying out the numbers to make sure everything balances, like your checkbook in consumer math, that math class that you only take if you can't get into algebra 2 and, you know, trigonometry, pre-calc, calculus. Euro games deal with variables, and that to me is more like an upper level math or a less comfortable math, a probability-based math.
Yeah, I could see that to some things. I think, and I don't know, like for 18xx with me too, a lot of it comes down to the planning, which isn't a math topic, but the math, I guess I don't normally get bothered by that in games. I think where I get bothered is where the math isn't tied to something that sort of makes sense. So if there, and that's to be fair, me, a personal thing. Like when I was a kid, I took algebra 2. Nothing made sense to me. I got decent grades on tests. I still don't know how I did it. But when I took physics, everything made sense because the math was tied to a real thing. Like if I calculated the speed of the flying baseball, and it came out to be 1,000,000 miles per hour, I done know I screwed up somewhere. But with economic games, it's usually tied to an economic theme, and the idea is money, and it makes sense when it increases or does what it does. Where it doesn't make sense to me is in a lot of Euros where it's like
arbitrary victory points.
Yeah, like I got 6 points for walking a dog. Why? Because points were needed for
because the game is about dogs, Andy. That's why.
And so that I think, I don't know, that's more annoying to me in math. Now I think, something else to discuss with math, and I don't think it's anything most of us sitting here have a problem with. But I know it's a complaint among a lot of people that dislike Euro games and economic games. When, they do something and then at the end, it's like the score pad has to be pulled out, like the quintessential game resolution. The end of Agricola, the end of Seven Wonders, the end of Sheriff of Nottingham, or whatever, where it's like, okay, I got this many points for doing this many points for doing that, X, Y, Z. And that can really frustrate the living heck out of a lot of gamers. It doesn't bother me. That's part of the experience. But
some people don't want that at all. I would say, though, Andy, on that spectrum, I think for them, I guess maybe it branches out, but I see the like what you're talking about there, like the Sheriff of Nottingham figuring out how much money you have, right? There's an economic game. Whoa. No, I'm just kidding. But it is still, isn't it? The thing is, though, like the idea that like your money is going to win you the game, and you're taking within the game of 18xx, within like 1846, a short 18xx game, you're going to be getting like roughly, I would say, 40 to 75 separate payouts from companies you have stock in. Does that sound accurate? What do you guys think? Or does that sound separate payouts that you will have to collect, and then you add all of those together and add them to everybody else's? And to me, honestly, it feels like just one separate payout is enough to make me feel like, well, that sort of crappy feeling at the end of Sheriff of Nottingham when we have to do a whole bunch of math. And you have to do that 40 to 75 times based on my absolutely arbitrary threw a number out of my butt number that Andy couldn't immediately disagree with.
Yeah, it depends on the game too. Like some have different number of operating rounds.
1840, I'm trying to use this as a minimum. I would say that
1846. Let's see. There should be an 1846. If most 18xx's are designed to end somewhere in the 7th round set of SRORs, so assume 14
rounds.
Yeah, so yeah, probably.
I would say that because you start the game with 1, and then usually by round 3 or round 2 even, you've got more than 1.
Yeah.
And then by the time you hit round like 4, you've usually got 3. And then by the time you hit round 5, you usually got, like, I had stock in 5 different companies because one of them was an absolute mistake in the last game that we played.
Yeah.
But yeah, like, so I was doing 5 calculations in the last round. And then I think, to me, like 1846 is the lower end of how many you're going to be doing.
Oh,
if you do those over and over and over, they all add together, and it's all done on your own. If there was a computer program that did all of this on its own, I feel like it would take an hour and a half out of the game, and I would probably enjoy the game, though I would still feel like there's other games I like better. ... Indonesia. Indonesia has real decisions, and all of them have to do with the numbers involved. It's a type of economic game that you will hear me say, why play 18xx when I know that I can play Indonesia? Why is 18xx got a bajillion different games in it when Indonesia works so well, and they could have made an Indonesia about all the stuff that 18xx is about?
I don't know. Like, the one thing Indonesia is lacking in that I think a lot of people play the 18xx for is long-term planning. Like, Indonesia has long-term planning, but it's much more tactical than 18xx typically is.
Yeah, it's tactical, but like you're having to make long-term decisions every time a merger comes up that involves you or that you put together a merger for other people.
Yeah, I don't know. Like I don't get the same long-term thing I do out of that, but like here's what I think. This is less of a math issue, but when I play Indonesia, I am typically less emotionally invested in my company. When I play
Well, you might lose it right away, and you're not going to lose the 18xx company
right,
unless you choose to.
in 18xx, like
It's part of the
one
game.
of the hardest things to get over in that game is when to cut your losses, and because everyone has this natural emotional investment. But I don't find the math to be a barrier on that. I think in Indonesia, the math, well, it does bog down a bit, but it bogs down right about the tail end when the game's going to be over pretty quickly anyway. Like that's the one criticism I know people, hit with an 18xx that I said it's probably sometimes justified, is that a lot of people can feel that they go on longer than they should. Like you're just playing it out, and it becomes more of an optimization game. And that's valid depending especially on the title. Like that's a criticism I would completely level against 1870. Like that game really goes on longer than it should sometimes. But or maybe even I don't know, 1830. I don't know. I don't know. I guess I don't feel that tedium in 1846 or 1889 like you do. It just, I don't see it.
To me, it's omnipresent. Every 18xx game involves it. It involves this frivolous, like it involves a part of the game that I feel like should just be automatically figured out for me. I don't want to have to figure out which of my 7 to 8 possible routes is worth the most money, because in the end of the game, that extra dollar for my shares is literally going to decide the winner, because there's no random really to help you out. I won't say random to help you out. Gosh, man, I've had that happen before, and I felt so frustrated when somebody said that. But like, there's no random in the game to really cause you problems. It's just other players can cause you problems, but it seems like in really ill-conceived and basic ways. And then, well, except on the map, it can be a lot more interesting. But in terms of the stock aspect of the game, I think I've still been consistently disappointed by the stock element of 18xx games. I never feel like it's handled in a very, it just seems to always encourage you to just do whatever you can to scoop up whatever you can at a point and then sell it all. And I think 1846 is the most to make it so you don't do that, but at the same time, it's got some frustrating ways in which you can do that. Like every 18xx game.
I like that aspect.
Like it when, like Andy, you like it when you've run a company well. You've parred it at a place where you could make money off of it. You waited 2 rounds, nobody bought it. You are maxed out in how much you can own in it because you know it's a good company. Somebody else buys your stock and then just sells it in the same operating round just to make it worth less. They never wanted your stock. They just wanted to make a little bit of money off it to start a new company.
Yep.
That's not strategy. That isn't. There's no strategy in that. That's just being mean and abusing a rule that sounds to me like is out of the spirit of the game. If the game's about making money, then if there's such an easy, low-hanging fruit, why doesn't every single player do it at every time?
Well, here's the deal with that, though. Depending on the game, right? Because in 1846, I think you can. Yeah. One, it doesn't actually damage your company initially.
No, but it does in most of them. That's kind of odd
true.
About 46.
But the other thing is, if you're talking in an 89 or a 30, when you do that, in a lot of these games, the only way to get payouts into the treasury is either withholding money or having shares in the open market. Like one of the things I've learned in some of these games is having those shares in the open market is not a bad thing. Sometimes that's actually saved me from an initial smack. So it's not that, I don't know. No, that doesn't bother me. I've even actually done it to myself in a few occasions, just to have things to start paying the treasury. so that doesn't bother me, those knees and sort of elbows and nastiness. I think for me, when it becomes to the math and the stock value, like I dislike more the way stocks are handled in Arkwright than I do in.
Yeah, I agree. Arkwright stocks are pointless. Like
Well,
to me, they feel like Panamax had the same sort of feeling where it's just like you just own all your own stocks and it's not that big of a deal.
Like I'm just buying victory points and we're calling it stocks, but I can't actually transition, sell off, buy into other people.
No, it's not. My favorite version of the victory points equaling stocks, and I know that it's kind of a stretch, but Age of Steam, like that's just like stocks in that game to me are always a fun decision.
Oh, how many shares to take? Yeah.
Yeah, like that's always entertaining. Whereas like who to buy my stock in 18xx is fun, but a lot of the stock market shenanigans, like just waiting until everybody spent their money and then selling one of your stocks to the open market because it hurts there, that's what you do in 1846. Whereas like in other 18xx games, apparently you still get, like Andy said, you get hurt in the short term, but you get this long-term benefit of a stock being there in the open market. Like, I mean, but still, like, let's just say, Andy, that somebody sells your stock and somebody else buys it up.
Mm-hmm.
You're no longer getting anything good, and your stock got hurt as a result.
True, but you can also turn around and do the same thing to somebody else. So.
Exactly, but that's why it sucks. That's why it sucks. Exactly, because it's not strategy. It's just you're like, I decided I don't want you to have much money, and I know this is going to happen, and so this is what I'm going to do. To me, that's not strategy at all. That's just like you being at the table and being like all mean to each other. And it sounds to me like that's where a lot of your 18xx games online go, because you all know these tricks. And so when somebody pulls a trick, it's not like, oh, you really got me. It's, I'm going to get you because I know how to do this stuff too. And that to me is like, that's where it turns into like a take that card game. Where it's like the cards are just your stocks and you're just slapping them down on the table and saying, take that.
Every game turns into that if you play it enough.
An interesting statement, Trent. A topic for another podcast.
Yeah.
For another episode, I should say. Another episode. Not another podcast.
Top 5 episodes from now.
Yeah, I think I want to revisit that for sure.
But
every game as a take that card game.
I think that I don't know, like different people have different tolerances for the math aspects of games. And some people don't want any in there because to some people doing math is work. To me, kind of working through that math is pleasurable. To other people, they can kind of take a little bit, but if it's too much, it's not okay. Some people like it in an economic game. Some people don't want it in an economic game because my wife's the same way. Like she doesn't want anything to do with a game that looks like economic games because she's an accounting professor. And she's like, I do that all day. Why would I want to do that in my fun?
My brother said that too. But at the same time, Andy, I feel like what my brother does for a living would make me miserable. And that's the way I feel about these games too.
Mm-hmm. But that's like, that's the aspect of the math in games is ultimately, is that a game flaw or is that a difference in the person?
To me, it's still at the point where it's a game flaw. This is a game that was designed in 1977 in many ways as a sacred cow that I'm currently sacrificing on an altar, that the only reason the listeners who I'm offending will stick with us is you, Andy. It's because of you. It's because they know that they've still got a voice here. But the thing is, to me, 40 years ago, this was math people accepted. This is the type of thing, when you spent $200 on a calculator and then you were so excited that all it did was just add up numbers you could have done by longhand. And to me, like, we're missing that step in 18xx games. Like, I'm pretty sure, Andy, that there is at least some element of artificial intelligence out there for 18xx games where you can figure out the best route for you.
So what you're saying is you'd like to play an 18xx game that didn't have the board?
No. I think the board is fine, but I want to be able to organically build the board and have a computer show me, like Google Maps does, that if I'm going to go this route, it's going to take me 44 minutes. Whereas if I'm going to go this route, it's going to take me 42 minutes. And
there is a program that does that. It's called Rails. You can download it on your iPad.
it is, but how much time does that add on to the game that you're adding everything into it as you play?
I mean, no, that's the deal. The other way
I've never seen
that,
anybody use it at any of our 18xx games. I've never seen this.
The main way the math is handled in 18xx is primarily two methods. Either poker chips, that doesn't really change the math. That just makes it easier to handle than paper money. The other thing that a lot of 18xxers do is spreadsheets, because you can easily compare what it ran for before, what it's running for now. There's no, figuring out how much per share. You just put in the dividends. It tells you how much money you made, and then you move on. And I will say that, I mean, the online 18xx's I play, it's very easy to keep track of the game state because you can see how much money's in the bank.
Because everybody's got spreadsheets out as if they were all
it's easy to keep track of the game state when people don't mess up who the priority dealer is.
Okay, that was one oops. I'm sorry. No, yeah, I mean, there's mistakes that can be made with it like anything, but it's much easier to track the way the numbers are playing out that way.
Yes, I'll agree with that.
Yeah. And so, I mean, and that's fine. But like I said, it's a matter of, what you like or do not like in games. None of the math involved in economic games of really any I've ever played has bothered me. There's never been one that's...
Have you ever, Andy, you have a son who's now 7 years old?
Right.
7.
He just turned 8.
Oh my gosh, okay, did he just turn 8?
Yeah, like a week or so ago.
A week or so. Okay, all right. Well, at least, I was going to say 6, so I'm glad that I said at least 7. Because the last time I asked you, you told me he was 5, and that's how long we've been friends, which, hey. I love you, Andy. Anyway, Will gets homework. Mm-hmm. And his homework will frequently involve the same type of calculations that you do in your 18xx games. Do you ever feel this sort of impulsive desire to do Will's math homework for him when it's in worksheet form and involves the exact same numbers you're calculating in 18xx?
Well, not as much, but that's because there's no motivation to do so.
Exactly. So you have to enjoy the rest of the game enough to be okay with this part that you even agree is not a desirable activity.
Well, I don't know. Adding up the numbers, when we do our online ones, I don't do this in real life because I don't want to bog the game down. But quite often in the online games, I'll run numbers. If I do this, it results in this much money. If I do this, and I have fun doing that.
You can do that on your own time, Andy, and that's fine. What the problem for me mainly results in is when you're doing that and I'm sitting at the table waiting for you to do that before I can do anything.
I'll see that. Well, that's not a math issue. That's a wait time issue then.
Well, but it's the math it's the game that produces that. We have a group full of people that are not like that in other games, that don't sit there and make sure they can add everything together, or sit there and take forever to make the best route by pointing and counting and then adding. That to me is not something that happens in other games. I don't sit there waiting and watching people do mental math. And not even mental math a lot of times. It'll involve then a calculator at some point.
Yeah, I mean, there is that, and that can happen in 18xx, but that is also why some groups play with, what is it? There's this big dice thing that's like a 6-way chess clock. Either you have 3 minutes to add up your route, or you just lose it.
Oh, okay. So whoever's best at mental math wins.
Yeah, well, there's that. I don't agree with that method myself, but I don't know.
Like I said, Andy, I think that your online version to me sounds like about the most that I would appreciate, and it would still be quite a bit of a hoop to jump through because it's a lot of adding those numbers together in my head. And when you put them in, at least you're guaranteeing that people can do it. So, Andy, essentially, my review of 1846 and my review of math and games in general is if it's being tracked by something like spreadsheets, then that seems totally okay. It seems like something I would absolutely appreciate being there in the game. Are we ever going to track a game on a spreadsheet as we're sitting there playing a game in person? No, that defeats the purpose of what we are doing, I feel like, by being all there together and yet still connected to this device that we're just punching in numbers and then being frustrated when we have to wait for other people on their turn. 18xx to me still hasn't gotten up to, at least to my to me as a person, to me and my level of patience, of what I'm willing to deal with in other players in terms of how much math they do on their turn. It all melts away when you're playing online, Andy. Absolutely. That sounds perfect to me. And I feel like your love for 18xx was born on a board and grew online and flourished online.
Only because I get to play it more often.
I would say to me at least, the frustrating things I'm saying melt away in the way that you're playing it online. When you've got a spreadsheet there, you make sure that all the calculations are at least they're there for everybody to see.
Yeah, and the other thing, the thing that makes it nice online is it removes the pressure from the math being a way that holds up the game. Like, I don't know, like I said, I don't feel that it does. Like, I don't notice it, but there's different tolerances for that kind of thing. So I don't know. Like, I don't have a problem with math in my games and a lot of it, but different people are going to have different kind of okays with that, and where they like it and where they don't. But I don't know. It doesn't bother me. But
my overall comment is you have to be okay with at least some math if you're ever going to play any heavy games.
Oh, absolutely. I can guarantee that. I can't think of a heavy game where math wouldn't be involved.
Yeah, I think, though, that like there are games that acknowledge what the human brain is capable of processing, and I think there are games that assume that that's not a factor.
Abstracts are games that human brains go beyond the ability to process that don't involve math.
That's what makes it good abstract.
It doesn't involve math, though. Yeah, you're right. It's that process. Yeah,
chess is solvable if you had infinite calculation capability.
Yeah, and then Go needs an even bigger computer, and then Arena needs an even bigger computer. And
Go needed 4 synced AIs, is what that needed, but.
And even then, I wouldn't say it's solved. It was just capable of beating a pretty good player.
Yeah.
That's a really great way, I think, Trent, to capitulate this. This has been, I know it's been a long discussion, everybody.
All your whining, Andy, or all your whining, Joe, and all
it's me. I'm the one who's whining. I admit it.
All this about the arithmetic and stuff, we all agree that abstracts are just better. And that's how it is.
And that's the good, the bored, and the ugly. That is my seal of approval on abstract games. All right, well, guys.
Yeah, Joe just says the abstracts are equal to Reiner Knazia's poison.
Also, yes, also the best game ever made. My seal of approval. So, hype games. Let's go ahead and talk a little bit here, guys, about what games we're looking forward to. I'm going to kick this off just because I'm talking about Kemet, which is a game where there's very little calculations there on the table, and so many of them are numbers that are not just whole numbers, not just things you can add together. Kemet is a game that has tons of different abilities, and it feels to me like it's solvable, like these other guys have mentioned, but at the same time, the intuition of other players, of the way that the combat system works, the way you can hide cards, sleight of hand is built into the system. I've heard some really great things from people who love Kemet, and maybe they don't have the same taste profile I do, but the things they said about Kemet made me excited to want to play it, and that's why it's at the top of my play with repeat players, play as many times as I can with the same group list.
Yep, I'm actually looking really forward to this one as too. I really enjoyed Kemet the one time I've played it, so I'm looking forward to getting some more in.
Me too.
Awesome. Well, yeah, my complaints were always just like, I'm sick of teaching it, and that's it. Like, I'm not going to comment on the game. I'm just going to say I'm sick of teaching it and then not want to play it. But honestly, getting to play with the same group like that would be amazing, and that's what I'm looking forward to. So thanks, guys. And next up, what is 18xx going to serve up for you, Trent?
Okay, I want to talk about 1822, which I'm going to play in about 2 weeks. 1822 is the Railways of Great Britain. It's going to take about 6 hours-ish to play if everybody's humping right along, which I doubt will happen, so probably more like 8. This one's interesting because companies can apparently buy other companies. There are 2 types of companies in the game, majors and minors. Majors can buy minors if they're connected, and both players agree. So I feel like the why I'm looking forward to it is it'll have a healthy dose of diplomacy. And that's all I'm gonna
That sounds like Trent's seal of approval, even in a hype form.
Yep. I'm looking forward to that. And also the bidding, just like the bidding for private at the beginning uses something called Lawsonian bidding, and like I need to see it in action because I'm not.
That sounds like science fiction, Trent.
I don't really even get it on paper. I need to kind of see how it works. Apparently, you bid on a bunch of the companies at once. I don't really understand exactly how it works, but it's a funky bidding system. And so I'm looking forward to seeing how it all works.
That sounds interesting.
Yeah, it's basically 18xx, the auction game. Like, it's nothing but auctions, but it's supposed to have like, a lot of privates with really crazy cool abilities, and
you're auctioning them all.
And you're auctioning them,
yes.
Auctioning them like every SR is just a crazy amount of auctions. So it just basically takes that beginning auction that a lot of people like in the 18xx and then just like, this is going to be the whole damn game.
Yep, everything seems to come up in auctions, and there's like a chunk that comes up each SR. So
what you guys are saying almost makes me feel like I'm excited to hear you guys continue to review 18xx games, just to hear just to sort of play through what sort of things could happen in my brain. And then a little bit of relief that I don't actually have to be there for like all the resolution of it. But
yeah, Andy and I are playing this in about 3 weeks, give or take. So we'll be in the same game. We'll find ways to hose each other. It'll be great.
Yeah. That's half the fun.
It is.
Yeah.
That's why we podcast too. Do you have something there, Andy?
Yeah, as I say, in my review or hype is just being able to play some games.
It's playing games with Trent. Yeah, you're gonna play whatever you can play, Andy, and that's
pretty much.
And we haven't seen Andy at a game night, and like I haven't seen you in forever. It feels like, man.
Nah,
I've been busy. You've been busy. It's
May and being a teacher, man. It's insane.
Oh, that's the truth. That's the truth.
Yeah.
Hey, so the summer. Andy is hyping the summer.
Yeah, hyping the summer and playing games, and
you have HeavyCon coming up too in 2 weeks, right? That's when you guys are playing 1822. So
if my brain's not mush by the end of that weekend, I've already signed up to play. What am I signed to? 4 18xx games, 2 Phil Eklund games. No, 3 Phil Eklund. No, 2 Phil Eklund games and a Cole Worley game.
I hope you have fun there, Andy. That sounds to me like what I get sentenced for when I break the law.
I'm playing 1822 Virgin Queen and Dune.
Yeah.
It sounds to me like Trent, like HeavyCon mixed together with a little bit of Fantasy Flight, just as a little bit of a seasoning.
Yeah, that to me just sounds like a crazy mix right there. So I'm looking forward to it. They're all 6-hour games. Don't get me wrong, but they're pretty different. So
Yo, one last note for the Terra Mystica app. When you guys were talking about the flow of history, and I was just thinking I'd rather play Pax Porfiriana.
I would rather play Tom here, but yeah.
But they released a new update, and the mermaid thing is fixed.
Oh, great. Well, on that note, we're going to go swim with the fishes here and play the mermaids on the Terra Mystica app. Thank you all for joining us. I'm your host, Joe Sallin. I've been joined tonight by
Andrew Dennison.
Trent Ham.
We're the good, the bored, and the ugly. We wish you have a great week of gaming and catch us next week here on our podcast. Thanks, everybody, and good night.
Oh, good night. What'd I do? Okay, where? Audible. No, there.
I have to pee so bad that as soon as I get this processing, I am literally going to sprint to the bathroom. This was, I feel like, I don't know, this was either the time when we lose all of the listeners that were just hanging on because of you and Trent, Andy, or it's a defining moment. And I hope so bad.
If the people tuning in haven't like, I have to feel like most of the listeners are like, I enjoyed the argument.
Yeah. Oh
I think
man,
that's
it is.
the case. Yeah.
Yeah. It's so like civil. It is so like ideal to me. I don't know what it is, but it's like to me, it's something that I look forward to. And like that's really saying something, you know, like it's a discussion that I always look forward to. So
yeah,
it makes it like Thursday's my favorite day of the week every time I say it in school. When I'm teaching days of the week, I'm always like, Thursday's my favorite. And I always think it's because of this. I gotta go pee, guys. I'll be right back.
Yep, bye. La, 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 la. Oh man.
Yeah, so during a couple points in that podcast, I was not here at all. I was dealing with child issues.
Had some kids being a little rambunctious there, did you?
Yeah, and so yeah, it was great.
Fun times. Gotta love being a parent, man.
It's good times.
Oh yeah.
So you are gonna be there on Sunday, but not there until like your normal time, right?
Right. Yeah. Yeah, we had planned to where were we going? McFarland Park. We were gonna go do some stuff in this afternoon as a family and whatnot. So yeah, I'll be doing that.
Okay.
So good time.
Your wife actually asked me for our geocaching name, and the thing is, we used an app like 4 years ago, but most of the time we just put in GPS coordinates into like a non-app thing. So I mean, I can, but it's like I re-downloaded it, and I mean, we might start using it again, but I mean, I could give her my name, but it would be useless.
I got you. So you just kind of look them up, throw them into something, and go to it.
Yeah, that's usually what we do.
Yeah. All right, I'll let her know.
I mean, we probably should use an app, but back when we started doing it, we didn't use the app, and that's just kind of how we got used to it. It was back before there really were apps.
Yeah. Yeah, no, they do the app and track their fines and all that and have a lot of fun that way. I'm kind of just follow along and do whatever.
Well, I enjoy doing it. I have fun doing it. I'm actually probably of the two parents, the one more into it. But we just, like a lot of times we go looking and we just used to always put them in our GPS device, and that's kind of what we always do. So
yeah,
I have a way to do it really fast and easy. So just load up in front of them, and there you go.
Yep, that is cool.
I can basically do the equivalent of like downloading a text file off of a website and then setting it straight into my GPS, and it's like this list of coordinates, and then you just go to each one. So it's like really easy. And so I don't know. I mean, I guess I could use an app. I just haven't really. So
yeah. Oh, that's cool though. It's fun. I'm just hoping I will actually have a game to review next week.
You guys have done like I assume all the towns around Ames.
Yeah, kind of getting into that. They've done a lot with Ames, and they're kind of working on some different challenges now. So like they're trying to get geocaches in like all the townships and stuff.
Okay.
Yeah, so they've been getting some in Boone and some in Nevada and some around Huxley and
Some in Boone. What?
Talking about geocaching.
Geocaches. Yeah, we were actually like in Boone tonight.
What kind of things do you? Wow, you were in Boone. Didn't even call me up or anything. Jeez, Andy.
Yeah, we weren't in Boone very long.
What part of Boone? Like Ledges?
No, we ended up actually the where was it? The place that used to be Golden Corral.
Saints Avenue Cafe.
Yeah, we ate there quick just because we wanted something we could eat with quick, and it was like reasonably okay. And then there was a geocache.
I actually like that place. They have a lot of vegetables there.
Yeah, and so there was one on the train there we grabbed, and then there was one kind of on the edge of town somewhere, and then we went back home.
Yeah, my 9-year-old, we actually found a couple tonight ourselves before the soccer game. My daughter was like really thrilled that she found the one in Kelly by the phone booth. You know, there's a phone booth still in Kelly.
So what kind of stuff is in there?
Well, that one's just,
Usually
a lot of things
it's-
are just logs.
It's
It's a sheet of
logs,
paper that you
but
sign. But, I mean,
Just
Oh,
to say
it's
that-
a piece of paper that you sign it.
Yep.
Okay.
it depends though. Some of them sometimes have random.
How will they be contained though?
they in a lot of different things. Like my wife has made this insanely evil one. Like specifically, they're called evil caches. To where she actually used the 3D printer and created fake rocks. And they're all around this lamppost, and every one you open just says, "This is not the real geocache." And then she created a tube that looks like it's the cache, and it says it's not the real cache in it, but you actually have to reverse unscrew the top of the screw that goes in the main cache, and then it's a secret compartment.
Huh.
So she gets a lot of favorite points on that one. But she did one all throughout Ames that's called the Chess Challenge.
Oh, that's your wife?
Yeah.
Okay, I am familiar with that one.
Yeah. No, she gets a lot of favorite points. But she actually made on the 3D printer like a cryptics from like the Da Vinci Code. And you have to find all of these other caches to decode the message to actually find the password to put in there and get the final goal.
Yeah, some of them get really
That's an
elaborate.
interesting-
They're pretty impressive.
That's like an art form. Yeah, that sounds really cool. Like essentially that's what the Da Vinci Code is all about.
Right. No, it's a really good one. But you know, like when I was in Indianapolis for those few days before Gen Con.
You were
Uh-huh.
geocaching?
Yeah, like we did this one where you had to find, it was like 16 geocaches throughout Indianapolis that would then give you the coordinates and clues to 4 geocaches, which would give you the coordinates to the master cache you had to unlock, which was like in this like nature preserve area. So yeah, it's really neat. Like, you know, like I'm not as diehard about it as my wife and son are, but I got to admit, like, it was really fun when we were just kicking around Indianapolis and there wasn't anything else to do, because it was one of those like, this, what we'd be doing is sitting around the hotel room or looking at each other going, now what do you want to do? I don't know. What do you want to do? You know? And so like we saw all kinds of different parts of Indianapolis that, you know, we'd never seen before, and that was kind of cool. And so I don't know, it's fun. I don't particularly like the nitty-gritty of the searching for it. Like my patience level is not high enough, but I like just kind of walking around with them and being out in the woods sometimes and hiking and stuff. So I'll often go with them to do things like that.
I found that different family members of mine like different aspects of it. And so we can all kind of find something that we like. My daughter, for instance, she gets really into like the getting to the area part. She likes, like, we're parked a ways away, and she likes to be the one to like carries around the GPS unit and tells us which way to go and stuff. When we actually get really close and we're hunting, she kind of checks out a little bit, and that's where my oldest son gets really into it.
Yeah,
that's kind of meanders until we're close, and he doesn't really. Yeah, so like the two of them actually make a good pairing.
Like I'm really good at occasionally spotting like a small thing or something, but like if it becomes difficult to find, I just kind of check out.
I'm the one that's good at the really, really strange things that people do, because I'm always looking at like crap that I may also my family's like looking at the tree and looking at stuff like that, and I'm like looking for like flipping over rocks and stuff like that. I'm always the one that's gonna find it if it's really abnormal. I'm usually the one that finds it. If it's pretty typical, then other people find it. I just like, okay, what would I do if I was putting this geocache here? What kind of weird crap would I do with it?
Yeah. I don't know. It's a fun little hobby, and I go with them to spend time with them, and I enjoy it, but I'm not like super into it. Same way when they will occasionally,
Yeah.
play a hobby game with me. It's like not super into it, but they humor me.
Doesn't sound to me like they do much humoring, Andy. They don't play the type of
to
games
a
you really like.
degree. Yeah, I
The
mean,
kind
there's that.
the kind of humor Andy likes in games is exploding kittens.
Yeah, exploding kittens.
Yeah. It's the real
Anyway,
fun.
I need to go. I'll
Yeah.
see you guys on Sunday. Joe, if you're not playing Gloomhaven and want to play games earlier, let me know.
Sure. I will totally let you know, man. I'm not exactly sure what's going on, Trent, but it'll depend on, and it might not necessarily even be Gloomhaven. There might be some other things I have going on in the early afternoon, but yeah.
Okay, like I can probably play whenever on Sunday, as long as someone gives me some notice to get there from Huxley. I can probably play about any time.
Sure. Yeah, I really wish that we could just get Kemet started, but I know like we want to get our whole group together, so we'll see.
Yeah, Andy.
I'll let you know, Trent. I'll let you know if I can, okay?
All right, sure. Later.
All right, thanks,
Awesome.
man.
Yeah, I should probably head to
Great
bed
podcast.
too, man.
Thanks for being here.
Yeah, night, man. I will see you later.
See ya.